This video is going to showcase a Manatarm spam build order for Rus. The main thing to note about this build order is that it is a reactive build order and not a static. Depending on what your opponent does, you may not be able to execute it, and hence why it's important that you don't go into a game planning to execute this particular build and you do it as a reaction to what your opponent is doing. After that being said, you want to open with the scout first, as you do in most builds with Rus, if not every single build. Then you want to get another scout from your hunting cabin, which you're gonna send one worker to build and rally your next worker that is built onto it to finish it off. Then your workers will queue up a house and a lumber mill and then stay on lumber. Those two workers that were building the hunting cabin. And then you should have 3 scouts, and it depends on I think even for the low levels you want to stay on 3 scouts up at least until you hit Fido. This game was played a bit earlier, where it was the more method to go for a high number of scouts before the scout food nerf came in, but you don't want to get more than 3 scouts in total during the feudal age, during the dark age, as they are quite expensive and it delays your age up. So it's more beneficial to focus on your economy and get your age up faster than getting an extra scout early. You only need 3 scouts to continuously rally food into your base, so you're ferrying deer back to your base with 2 scouts and using 1 scout to see what your opponent is doing. So obviously, if at lower ranks, you might want to have a few more. Even if you're at a pretty decently high rank, it still requires a lot of attention. So if you're at feudal age, and it might be worth sparing a few resources like 70 food to get 1 additional scout, just to make it easier for you to ferry the deer carcasses. Now the early game is the same as any Rus build, you just go around the map trying to get your bounty up as high as possible. I'm actually not sure why I only have 1 on lumber. You want to have 2 on lumber and the rest on food. The 2 on lumber are the ones from the one that build the lumber camp. So there's nothing really more to mention about the early game, as the early game for Rus is more or less the same no matter what build order you're doing. The number of people you want, the number of villagers you want on your age up is also not specific. It can be whatever you feel like is appropriate given which civ you're playing. You might want it to be a bit faster versus English versus other non-aggressive civs. In which games you'll actually execute this build order, you might want it less because you're not going to be pushing. And yeah, so the main way this build order works is that you get to H3 a lot faster than your opponent, and instead of just picking up a few relics and going into late game, you go for sort of an all-in spamming Manatarms into the base while they're at H2, which makes it very hard for them to get any units to counter yours, as Manatarms don't have any counter from any civ up until H3. The only sort of unit that deals somewhat okay with Manatarms are the camel archers that are accessible by Abbasid, and I haven't actually quite tested it, but probably if your opponent, it's just unlikely, but potentially Mangadais could deal with them. Both the camel archers and the Mangadai only work because the Manatarms can't efficiently catch up to them, but they're still very slow at killing them, and you need a large mass of them to actually deal with the Manatarms. Now, like every other Rus build, you want to get professional scouts going. I would recommend rallying villagers on gold. On wood. After you go up to H2, and if you see your opponent build any sort of production structure, aka barracks, a archer range or stable, then you want to transfer some of your food workers to your wood, just so that you can get a defensive production structure going for yourself. Otherwise, just rallying units onto wood is good enough. Now, since my professional scouts undone, I can keep a perfect vision of my opponent and what he's doing. Also, if at all possible, this again applies for every single scenario when playing Rus, if it is possible, it is probably beneficial to grab the opponent's hands first, as you'll most likely get professional scouts earlier than your opponent, which makes it easier to secure their camps. But your main focus should be of going up to H3 as fast as possible, which is a similar build for most Rus builds. This particular build works great against civs that play for eco boom and don't plan to age up to H3 straight away. By that I mean Chinese and the Abbasid primarily, as they are mostly known for going for a second or third TC. Now again, the Abbasid can go up to H3 just as fast as the Rus can, and with the new patch maybe coming in, the one that's currently on the test server essentially, with that one perhaps the Chinese can do it as well, but that's hence why this is a reactive build order. You only do it if your opponent, if you can see your opponent will take up to H3 later than you significantly. Otherwise you can just go for a different fast H3 build order, which there are many of. As you can see, one issue is potentially getting a deer from further side, is if you haven't collected enough sheep, you might run out of sheep before your scouts arrive back home, which is something to keep in mind. I would also recommend getting a watchtower at your home base next to your lumber mill, just so get that increased wood gather. Now, as my opponent still hasn't build a production structure, at least as far as I'm aware, I'm going to keep going with this build order. It's again as simple as possible. You just get your H3 as fast as you can, which you achieve by selling, if you can, wood, if not food, on the golden gate with each ticket, and then going up to H3 as soon as you get 1.2k 600. I wanted to wait a little bit and not waste wood, because you actually want to save up a decent amount of wood for the barracks transition. This is a bit more free form. It doesn't have a direct instruction. You should have the amount of barracks you feel like you can support. I would say no less than 3 to start off with, and then you can add 4 and 5 with the progression of the game. I think 4 barracks is a good number to strive at. Potentially, ideally, you might not even require a mining camp for your gold at all, if you do this build, which is another nice thing. Since the mana camps are so gold efficient, you won't require much gold. But it might be a still good idea to get gold if you wanna not go only on this all-in and still wanna get the relics around the map. Now that I hit H3, as soon as I'm gonna be able to, I'm gonna start spamming out mana tamps from the barracks that I've created. Again, it's only gonna work if your opponent isn't going to age up as fast as you. So you can go into this build order from any stage really. If you had a part where you had somewhat of a fight with your opponent, and then eventually you were able to age out and age up faster than him, you can still go for this. The only thing that matters is that you get up faster than your opponent does. So yeah, I would say you can straight up rally potentially mana tamps into the opponent's base. Now, one advantage that the Chinese has against this particular build is that the Chinese has the bombard-ish like defensive shooting mechanism of their buildings or their defense structure like TC and the Barbican, which do decent amount of damage to the Manatams. So for Chinese in particular, you might want to delay a bit. For every other civ, you can just just set a rally straight away and start rallying in your Manatams straight away into the base. And what you want to do is just start targeting down the workers. You can't target an army if they have any, but otherwise I would suggest targeting down the workers. You just, if you force worker idle time, it's already a win for you at the start. This build is meant to do a lot of damage, but you can start slow. You don't have to get huge worker kills even ever, really, as long as you keep the worker count low enough so that it's only able to garrison all of his units. That's good enough. Now I have 3 barracks going, mainly lacking wood to add another one. I think if with a little bit of better resource management, you should be able to get another barracks, and you should have the resource to produce out of this. I also believe that having two warrior monks might be a bit too much, and maybe one is good enough, as you're already being quite aggressive and you might want to keep all your gold that you can. Now, well, again, with Chinese, it's very nice to kill the Imperial tax collector, which I should have focused down on a bit earlier. It is not too bad if you stop your opponent from getting a mass of units, as even archers at a certain point, it's a very late point, as they require quite a lot of units, but at a certain point they start dealing okay versus Manatams, so you just wanna maybe whittle down the numbers a bit, but other than that you just wanna keep spamming Manatams into their base and targeting down workers primarily. Now my opponent went for the repeater crossbow units from Chinese, the Chinese specific unit, which is a really bad call, as the whole thing is that they fire a lot for little damage, which is the worst thing you can have against an armored unit, so that definitely is helpful for me. As you can see, I have a lot of money in the bank, so I can definitely afford these production structures, at least currently. And as the game goes on, you can only be able to afford more and more. Now at this point I already gathered 3 relics, and my opponent is unable to age up, as he's trying to muster an army to deflect your push, which is another thing with this, is that unless your opponent already went for H3 and got to H3 before your Manatams arrived, your opponent is unlikely to get to H3, as you can prevent it in most scenarios, and your opponent won't be able to even focus on getting H3, as you will be constantly harassing him. Now again, you probably want to split your knights a bit, split your Manatams a bit more and send them all over your opponent's base. Currently I'm waiting a bit to gather a bigger amount of Manatams, as a few of them get killed pretty fast. At this point I've gathered every single relic. One relic is around 5 workers, so that if I'm able to house those, that will be 5. It's equal to 5 workers. One thing obviously you also need to look out is keeping ferrying of the deer, and if you run out of deer, to account for that and rather move on to berry or to start thinking about farms. I would recommend going to berries, as this is somewhat of an all-in strategy, so you're not thinking about the late game, and I will just make your attack weaker. Here I overdid on gold, especially given that I'm bringing in a lot of relics. That's not really required for me. So here, again, it's not amazing, but I'm grouping a lot of my units together, but that's because I want to whittle down his army count, and then I send a smaller amount of units to deal with his wood line. So yeah, the build is at this point pretty much explained as much as it can be. You just the longer it keeps going, you just add in more and more barracks and produce more and more units. You should, if your opponent stays in H2, there should be almost no way for you to lose. If your opponent ages up in the middle of your fight, the best you can do is try to focus down any crossbowmen that come out from their from their structures. If they're making knights, that's good for you because they're way more gold intensive, and then you want to deny gold. So you basically, if they are able to get to H3, you want to make sure to deny all of the gold you can, so that they're unable to produce units that counter you. Now my opponent has cleaned up the mana terms in his base, but he has lost a large number of workers, and he also is, allowed me to get all of my relics going. So even though it might look like it's not the best possible position I could have had, it's still just fine for me, as my opponent's eco should be worse than mine now, and my army is still rival to his. Again, probably splitting. I probably would recommend splitting a bit more of your mana thumbs around than I do, just so that you can get a larger portion of workers' kills. Sending off that one mana thumb into woodline would probably cause a lot of disruption. Like, as you can see, pretty much all the time, he has fully garrisoned every single one of his workers that he can garrison. His main and secondary TC have 20 and 10 villagers in them, which again is really good for me. Some villagers die, a lot of them have first idle time, so it just gives you mob control everywhere else. So now that I have done damage, I've not only gained every single relic, I'm now controlling 2 sides, and if I was a little bit faster, I could have been controlling all 3 sides. You can transition out of this, but until your opponent hits H3, I really don't see a reason to transition out of this. Obviously, that's another thing. This is also a good thing to do. You should pick up your boars. I probably should have done this a lot earlier. Unfortunately, I'm just 10 short of getting 30 a bounty, but picking up the boars with your mana thumbs is also not a bad shout, for obvious reasons. Maybe get in the market, as I'm doing now, to keep the possibility of producing mana thumbs, as they're much more food intensive than gold, and you should be covered by gold with the relics that you're gonna get. You don't want to let your opponents to just get rid of your sides, so you should definitely do with that. And another nice thing about mana thumbs again is that this tower does not really stop me from doing anything. And now that I build up a really nice mass of mana thumbs, my opponent cannot really do anything anymore. Not that he could do much earlier. So this build order might not always feel the best, but I've played it multiple times. I used it in one game in a tournament, and given the situation is right, it does work pretty well. So yeah, that's gonna be the first video. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.